What if the greatest meal you ever cooked wasn't in a restaurant, but in a world that shouldn't exist, in a body that wasn't yours, for a family that didn't know you yet? And what if a single bowl of rice with egg was worth more than every star on your wall? Daniel So was 34 years old, head chef, Seattle, Washington. He ran his own kitchen, held his own knives, and smelled of sesame oil at the end of every shift. He weighed 92 kilograms and hadn't missed a service in 11 years. Then he fell asleep at the wheel on an empty highway, and the world went dark. And somewhere else, in a hut made of crumbling clay on the side of a cold mountain, something woke up, not gradually, all at once, like cold water thrown in the face. Pain first, sharp, a rusty nail twisting between the ribs. Then the smell, sour wine, unwashed skin, something rotten underneath all of it. Then a kick to the shin and a woman's voice cutting through the dark like a blade. Get up, drunkard. Daniel reached for his hand. His hand didn't obey. It wasn't broken. It was someone else's. Thin fingers, cracked nails worn to the flesh, knuckles gray with grime. He looked down, ribs pushing through the skin like the keys of an out-of-tune piano. Skinny legs under a tattered blanket. A body that weighed 50 kilograms and reeked of rice wine. This was not his body. The woman in the doorway threw a name at him the way you throw scraps to a dog. So Jiho, that's what you call a person you stopped considering human a long time ago. And then memory flooded in, not his own, someone else's, like a bucket of ice water dumped over his mind. So Jiho, 29 years old, tenant farmer on landlord Chetakwan's land, a drunk, a slacker, a man who sold his own son's winter sandals to buy a jug of macchiali, a man whose daughter hid bread crusts under her pillow because she didn't trust tomorrow, a man whose wife turned her back to the wall every night. Daniel was on his hands and knees on a dirt floor, vomiting sour wine and nothing else. Even the bile was watery. This man hadn't eaten in days. The woman in the doorway didn't move, didn't hand him a rag, just watched. Her name was Minsu, his wife, 29 years old. She looked 40. She turned away, and that's when Daniel felt it. Not pain, not nausea. A draft somewhere at the edge of his mind. A door he hadn't noticed before. He reached for it carefully, like a hot frying pan handle, and it swung open. Inside, rows of industrial stainless steel refrigerators gleaming under cold light. Bags of real white rice, Japanese, Korean, Thai. Not the rancid grain rotting in the corner of this hut. Bottles of soy sauce, fish sauce, sesame oil, miso, 3 kinds of salt, beef in the freezer, pork, salmon, and on the shelf, his knives, that exact set of Japanese blades from his 25th birthday. He could recognize them by weight with his eyes closed. Frying pans, pots, a meat thermometer, and in the corner, one more door, small, with a sign. 2 words, UO, feed. He jerked back. The door slammed shut. He was on the dirt floor again. But his hands weren't shaking anymore. In the corner of the hut, 2 children were sleeping, a boy of 7, a girl of 5, Yeonho and Hannah. Not his by blood, his now. The hut was one room, a hearth, a rusty pot, 1 whole bowl, 2 cracked ones, a small bag of rancid rice that in his old kitchen he would have thrown out without a second thought. Here, it was all that stood between 3 people and nothing. He waited until Minsu went to the well, until the children were still. Then he reached through the door again. It opened more easily this time. His feet were on the earthen floor. His hands were already on the shelf. A handful of real rice, dense and heavy, smelling of purity. 1 egg, a pinch of sea salt, a spoonful of soy sauce, a strip of dry gim seaweed, a small bottle of sesame oil. He brought the bottle to his nose, and for 1 second, he was standing in his own kitchen again. He heard the range hood. He felt the heat of a real stove rising against his face. The second ended. He closed the door. He stood by the hearth. So Jiho's hands were weak, but they remembered how to light a fire. Muscle memory from another life. Daniel let it go. The fire caught. He rinsed the rice 3 times, cooked it with exactly the right water. He found a knife, dull, rusty, but a knife, and cut the seaweed into thin strips. He cracked the egg, beat it with chopsticks, poured it over the rice, scattered the seaweed. A drop of sesame oil into each bowl, a spoonful of soy sauce. Gayer and bap, rice with egg, the simplest dish in the world. He had made it 1,000 times on hungover mornings before a late shift. A dish that needs no skill, just good ingredients and a touch of care. The aroma filled the hut, warm, nutty from the sesame. That scent could not exist in this house. This house knew only rotten grain and stale alcohol. And now it smelled of real food. The girl woke up first. Hannah sat up, sniffed the air, her eyes huge and dark. She looked at Daniel, at the pot, back at Daniel, and she crawled closer, still clutching her bread crust. The boy woke up and his face went hard immediately, jaw tight, eyes old and angry. 7 years old with the eyes of a man who has been disappointed too many times to count. He pulled his sister back, away from their father, away from the smell. Daniel didn't move, didn't reach out, didn't try to persuade anyone. He set the 2 cracked bowls close to the children, the whole bowl further away from Mintu. He placed the chopsticks. He sat to one side, and he waited. Hannah looked at the bowl, at her brother, at the bowl. Her nostrils flared. Young-ho didn't move, but his jaw tightened in a different way. Not anger, hunger. Hannah pulled free from her brother's grip. She crawled forward. She picked up the chopsticks. She hooked some rice, brought it to her mouth, froze, looked at Daniel as if checking whether he'd take it away. He nodded. She put the rice in her mouth, chewed, and started to cry. Tears ran down her cheeks as she ate, quickly, hungrily, chopsticks and fingers both. Because it was delicious. Because for the first time in a long time, something was genuinely delicious. Young-ho stood up slowly. He walked over. He sat. He took a bowl. He ate in silence. He didn't cry, but his hands were shaking. Mintu returned from the well. She froze in the doorway, the bucket swaying in her grip. Water splashed onto the floor. She looked at the children, at the bowls, at the steam, at the shiny drop of oil gleaming on the surface of the rice. She lowered the bucket. She dropped to her knees. She took her bowl with both hands. She brought it to her face and closed her eyes, sniffed. Then she asked, quietly, where he had gotten it. Not a question, a demand. Daniel looked her in the eyes and said he would explain everything, but not today. Today, just eat. Mintu was silent for a long time. Then she picked up her chopsticks. She ate slowly, not greedily like the children, like a person afraid this is a dream, like someone who knows that if you eat too fast, you might wake up. She didn't take her eyes off him. Daniel sat on the dirt floor in the body of a dead drunk in a world he didn't recognize. His head was buzzing. His ribs were shooting with pain. Behind him was a door to a pantry that shouldn't exist. And in front of him, 3 people were eating rice with egg. One of them was still crying. Hannah looked up when her bowl was empty. Her tears had dried. She looked at Daniel and said one word. More. He smiled, and that smile was his, not so Jiho's, his own. He said there would be more tomorrow, and the day after that too. Mintu turned away before he finished the sentence, but he saw her press her palm to her lips. Her shoulders shook once, just once. Then she stood, gathered the bowls, and walked out to the well with her back perfectly straight. The step of a person who has not yet allowed herself to hope, but is carrying it anyway, carefully, like something that might break. Daniel spent the next day on reconnaissance, so Jiho's body ached with every step, but he forced himself out. The village of Tabika lay on a mountainside between 2 ridges, 120 households. Half of them looked no better than his own crumbling hut, mud brick walls, thatch roofs, patches upon patches. A single well served half the village, and there was a line for it from dawn. The second well belonged to the village headman. People paid to use it. The rice field stretched down the slope in thin, exhausted rows. The stalks were weak, the ears sparse. 3rd year of crop failure. You could feel it in how people moved, slowly, conserving every drop of strength, in how they looked at each other. The cautious squint of neighbors when food is running out and mouths keep multiplying. So Jiho's memories offered fragments. Landlord Chetikwan had doubled the rent. War tax. War in the north. Rumors traveled from market to market, warped by fear until they were unrecognizable. Steppe nomads burning towns. The royal army conscripting every man between 16 and 40. Plague moving from the west. Nobody knew the truth, but everyone knew one thing. Half the households in this valley would not survive until winter. Daniel crouched at the edge of the field and took a handful of soil. He crumbled it between his fingers. Dry, clay heavy, packed tight, but not dead. This soil could be worked if you knew how. In his pantry, on a shelf he hadn't reached yet, lay packets of seeds. Potatoes, corn, tomatoes, chili peppers, squash. Crops this world had never seen. Crops that could change everything. But that was a long way off. Right now the task was simpler. Survive until tomorrow. Feed everyone today. When he returned, Hannah was alone by the hut, molding something round out of mud. She saw Daniel and froze, alert eyes. But she didn't run. The morning rice and egg had earned him that, a small vote of confidence from a 5-year-old. He crouched beside her and asked what she was making. She said it was a pie. Daniel looked at the lump of mud. He nodded seriously. He said the shape was good, but it needed more filling. Hannah stared at him like he was crazy. Then the corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile, almost. She asked if dinner would be like breakfast. He said it would be better. Hannah froze. She considered this. Then she went back to her mud pie, but sitting half a step closer than before. That evening Daniel cooked pork, thin slices of meat from the pantry, fried in cast iron with garlic and ginger. The fat melted. The garlic turned golden. The smell rose and seeped through every crack in the walls. Mitsu stood in the doorway and stared. Young-ho stood behind her, mouth slightly open. For the first time all day, his eyes were not angry, just hungry, purely, simply hungry. Mitsu sat down and asked where the meat came from. Daniel told her about Uncle Manbook, a traveling merchant, a family gift. She listened without expression. She didn't believe a single word. He could see that plainly. But she looked at the children. She looked at the meat in the pan, and she began to eat. Young-ho ate quickly, covering his bowl with one hand, the habit of a hungry child protecting his food. Hannah ate slowly. She picked up each piece of pork with chopsticks, brought it to her nose, sniffed, then closed her eyes while chewing. The face of a small, serious critic deciding the fate of the world. Restaurant critics had come to Daniel's kitchen in Seattle. He was nervous before every visit. None of them had ever mattered as much as this 5-year-old girl with dirty knees. Hannah put down her chopsticks. She looked at Daniel. She said one word. Good. Not great. Not excellent. Good. Daniel accepted the grade with a nod. Hannah nodded back and went to bed. Businesslike, stern, 5 years old. After dinner, Mitsu sat across from him and the fire burned low between them. She said she didn't know what game he was playing. She had seen this before. Every promise to quit, every sworn oath to go to the fields. Every time the change lasted 3 days. Then she would find him face down in a pool of his own vomit, as she would explain to the children why Appa couldn't get up again. She said that if this was just another episode, she would not survive it, not physically, inside. Something would break for good, and she would take the children and leave and never look back. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make excuses. When she fell silent, he said only one thing. He wasn't asking her to believe him. He was asking her to give it 1 week, just 7 days. And if at the end of the week she saw what she had seen before, he would help her pack himself. Mitsu looked at him for a long time in the light of the coals. Her face was young, tired, beautiful. She said, a week, and she went to lie down next to the children. Between them on the dirt floor, 1/2 meter of earth and 6 years of someone else's hatred. Daniel lay there staring at the dark. The sign on the pantry door appeared in his mind. You won't feed. He didn't know who had put him here. He didn't know why it was him. But he knew one thing with total clarity. Tomorrow morning he would be up before everyone else, and he would make breakfast. The week began with rain. It pounded on the thatched roof and seeped in through 3 places. Daniel woke in the dark. His muscles were burning from chopping wood the day before. So Gio's hands weren't built for labor. 6 years of idleness had turned them into rags. But his mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years, maybe ever. He opened the pantry door and took flour, eggs, sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, and dry yeast. Yeast was a risk. In this world, leavening meant sourdough that fermented for weeks. His yeast worked in an hour. If anyone watched the dough rise that fast, the questions would be deeply uncomfortable. But the children needed bread. He needed the dough by memory. Thousands of repetitions across a lifetime. Culinary school, first restaurant, his own kitchen, his hands remembered every fold. He set the dough by the hearth to rise and climb onto the roof in the rain to patch the holes. His fingers slipped. Water lashed his face. He fixed 2 of the 3 holes. The third needed nails he didn't have yet. When he came down, the dough had doubled. He divided it, rolled each piece with his palms, laid them in the pan. Flatbreads, fried over low heat, flipped with a wooden spatula he had carved from a branch the night before. They puffed up. Golden spots spread across the surface. The aroma filled the hut, warm, bready, alive. Hannah woke up and looked at the pan. She said bread isn't round. Bread comes in burnt lumps of porridge. Daniel said it could also be round. She crawled closer, picked up a flatbread, passed it hand to hand because it was hot, took a bite. Her eyes went wide. She said it was soft and sweet and warm inside. He told her tomorrow he would put filling inside. Hannah looked at him very seriously and said she wanted a sweet one. He said it would be sweet. Their first real conversation, no fear, no weariness. Just a father and daughter discussing bread. Young-ho sat by the wall the whole time. He didn't approach. But when Daniel placed a flatbread beside him and stepped back, the boy waited. 1 minute, 2. Then he took it. He ate with his back turned, hiding. But he ate. Mitsu turned the flatbread over in her hands, squeezed it. Springy. Nothing like the dense, heavy bread of this world. She asked where he learned to make it. He said it was his grandmother's recipe from a long time ago. Half a lie. His grandmother did bake, but not like this. Not here. Not in this world. Mitsu didn't believe him, but she ate the flatbread down to the last crumb, and that was enough. Day 3. The rain had stopped. Daniel went out to the fields for the first time, so Jiho's body knew the movements, bending, pulling weeds, checking roots. But the arms gave out after an hour. He sat down on the ground gasping. Mitsu was working nearby. She didn't look at him, but he knew she was noticing. Noticing that he had gone out. Noticing that he was trying. An old woman from the neighboring plot stopped and stared at him with her mouth hanging open. Apparently, so Jiho in the field was as rare as a solar eclipse. By evening, the whole village knew. The drunkard had gone out alone. No cane, no threats, alone. Day 4. Daniel fixed the door. It had been hanging on a single hinge since Jiho had kicked it in a rage 2 months ago. No tools. Just a stone and a piece of wire. 2 hours of work. The door hung straight. It closed without a squeak. A small thing. But that evening Mitsu looked at the door, then at Daniel, and her eyes, for the first time, weren't piercing. Just surprised. Day 5. 4 buckets of water drawn from the well before dawn, carried into the house, set against the wall. Mitsu came out and saw them. She froze. 6 years. For 6 years she had gone to the well every morning alone, the rope cutting into her palms. Not once in 6 years had Jiho brought water. Not once. She stood looking at the 4 buckets and said nothing. Then she went out to the fields. But her gait was different. Softer, slower, like a person carrying something fragile, hope, or the fear of it. Day 6. A neighbor appeared at the door. Sunyuna, a young widow, red-eyed, voice rough from crying. Her fire had gone out. She came for a light. Daniel gave her a burning twig. Yuna took it. Then she sniffed the air. The smell of cooked vegetables and a drop of oil drifted from the hut. In a village where dinner was plain porridge, that smell was like a message from another world. Yuna stood there breathing it in, her eyes closing, her face going soft for just a moment. Then she caught herself. She thanked them and left. But Daniel saw it. That second when the scent of food broke through the armor of grief and pulled out something genuine. He filed it away. That moment mattered. He didn't know how yet, but it mattered. Day 7. A full week. Daniel made breakfast and set out for bowls for the first time. 4, not 3. 1 for himself. The pantry only replenished supplies for meals he cooked for others. He had gone a week eating leftovers or nothing. But today was different. Today he needed to sit at the table with them, like a family. Mitsu came out and looked at the 4 bowls. She walked over. She sat down. The children sat beside her. They ate together, all 4, in silence. When the bowls were empty, Mitsu looked up. She said the week had passed. Daniel nodded. She said she didn't understand what had happened to him. Didn't understand the food, the cooking, the water, the work. Didn't understand where the man sitting in front of her had come from, because this was not the man she had married. Daniel was silent. Mitsu said she was giving him 1 more week. She stood, went out, and stopped at the door. She turned around and said the flatbreads were delicious. Then she left. Delicious. 1 word. Daniel sat on the floor and breathed. His nails dug into his palms, not from anger, because 1 word from this woman, after everything, could mean more than any review he had ever received. Hannah walked over. She placed her small dirty hand on his knee. She said Appa was a good cook. Daniel covered her hand with his and said tomorrow would be even better. Hannah nodded seriously, as if signing a contract, and walked away. The second week was the week of hands. One good meal wouldn't save this family. The hut was falling apart. The roof still leaked in one place. The floor turned to mud after every rain. The children slept on thin mats that offered no warmth. Mitsu did laundry in ice-cold water. Her hands were cracked and bleeding. He needed tools, and there was a set in the pantry: hammer, saw, chisel, nails, pliers. The rule was clear: take it once and it's yours forever. There would be no second chance. He wrapped the tools in a rag and built a cover story. Behind the village lay a collapsed shed that belonged to no one. He went there, dug around, came back with tools. He rubbed the new nails against a rock, soaked them in mud. Rusty enough. Not perfect. Good enough. For 3 days he rebuilt the roof properly. Not straw plugs, real work. New beams, layered straw, clay seal. When the next rain came 2 days later, not a single drop fell inside. Mitsu stood in the middle of the hut and looked up at a dry ceiling. For the first time in 3 years, Young-ho looked up too. Then he looked at Daniel, more and more often now. The boy never approached, never spoke, but he watched every move. When Daniel chopped wood, Young-ho sat 10 paces away. When Daniel repaired the wall, he came closer. On the 9th day overall, Young-ho picked up a stone and brought it to the wall, placed it silently right where the gap was, then left. The stone was the right size. The boy had watched long enough to know exactly what was needed. Daniel set the stone into the wall without a word. Sometimes silence is better than any praise. On the 10th day, the village headman arrived. Park Jong-soo, a man in his 50s, red-faced and soft around the edges. He wasn't evil, just weak. A man who did whatever landlord Cho told him and drank to forget how much he collected. He looked at the new roof, the straight door. He sniffed the air, rice with vegetables, sesame oil, soy sauce. He cleared his throat and said the community had noticed. Jiho working, Jiho sober, 10 days. Then he hesitated. He looked away and said manager Cho's tax collector was coming in a week. Double, a war tax. Whoever couldn't pay would lose their land, or give a son to labor, or a daughter. Daniel's grip tightened around the wooden spoon in his hand. A daughter, 5-year-old Hannah with her mud pies and her serious face and her verdict of good. He asked how much. Park Jong-soo named the sum, 5.9 of silver per household. 600 for the whole village. An insane number. Half the households didn't have a single coin. The headman left with slumped shoulders and heavy steps, a man delivering bad news house by house. All day long, Daniel returned to the hearth. He stirred the rice. He thought. 5.9 of silver. The pantry held food and tools, not money. He could feed his family. He could not pay the tax. He had to earn it in 7 days in a village where almost no one had coin. He thought about it all evening. Mitsu noticed his silence. When she asked, he told her. She didn't flinch. She already knew. She had heard it in the fields all day. And then an idea arrived, simple as all good ideas. The market. Once every 10 days, at the fork in the road, merchants and travelers and farmers from surrounding villages gathered. At the market they paid with copper, sometimes silver. At the market, you could sell. Daniel closed his eyes and leafed through his recipe archive. What could be made from local ingredients with pantry additions? Something unfamiliar, but not threatening. Something you could eat with your hands while standing in a crowd. Cheap to make, luxurious to eat, hot. Hotteok, sweet-filled pastries fried in oil, crispy outside, soft and warm inside. Honey and cinnamon melting in the center. In Seattle, he had sold these at festivals for $3 a piece. People waited in line for 40 minutes. Here, the only sweet thing available was honey if you were lucky, or dried plums, or nothing. He opened his eyes. He told Mitsu he was going to the market to sell flatbreads. Mitsu blinked. Then she got up and went to the children. But at the threshold she turned around. She said that if he needed help kneading the dough, she would get up early, and she left. She offered to help. Without being asked, she did it on her own. Daniel sat by the dead hearth in the dark and pressed his palms against his face. The skin was rough and alien, but the tears on it were entirely his own. The next 3 days were preparation. Before dawn every morning, flour hidden in 3 different spots, under the floorboards, in a hole behind the hut, in a tree hollow by the stream. No one would see the entire stash at once. Sugar was the problem. In this world, sugar was a luxury ordinary peasants hadn't seen in years. He went to the beekeeper on the edge of the village, 10 hives, dark wild herb honey, a fence in ruins. Daniel offered a trade, fix the fence, get a jar of honey. The beekeeper looked at him the same way everyone in the village did. So Jiho, offering work, that happens. But the fence truly was falling apart. He agreed. Daniel worked half a day. By evening, the fence stood straight. The beekeeper brought out a pot of honey, bigger than promised. He scratched his chin and said there would be more work if Jiho wanted more honey. His first business contact. Daniel carried the pot home and thought, not magic, not the pantry, hands, work, exchange. The pantry gives a foundation, food that doesn't exist here, knowledge that doesn't belong to this century. But everything else has to be built, through labor, through people, through trust earned millimeter by millimeter. 2 days before the market, the dough was going. At night, while everyone slept, he mixed it in batches. By morning it had risen. He divided it into fist-sized balls, wrapped them in cloth, placed them in baskets. The filling, honey mixed with cinnamon and crushed sugar, thick and sticky and sweet. He tasted it. Good, not perfect. A real hotdog needs brown sugar and ground nuts. But in a world where sweets are a luxury, this filling was a treasure. Before dawn on market morning, Mintu was up, just as she had promised. She walked to the table. She touched the dough with one finger, soft, springy. Nothing she had ever felt before. Daniel showed her how to shape the balls, place the filling, pinch the edges closed. Mintu did it in silence. Her fingers were quick and precise. The hands of a woman who had worked with her hands her entire life. An hour later, 60 balls of filled dough, 60 hotdog, to baskets. Mintu looked at everything packed and ready. She said she would go with him. Someone had to make sure he didn't give it all away for free. It was a joke, the first joke in all this time. Her face was serious. Her voice was steady. But it was a joke. Daniel didn't smile. If he had, she would have closed herself off again. He just nodded and said he needed her help. They left the children with Yuna and set out before dawn. For hours on foot, Daniel carried both baskets first. Mintu took one back without a word. She shared the weight without being asked. The market was larger than expected. 3, maybe 400 people. Merchants, farmers. Everything gray and dull, as if the air itself had faded. Bolts of rough cloth, clay pots, grain, dried fish. Daniel found an open spot at the edge of the square. He built a fire. He set down the pan. He poured in oil. While the oil heated, he rolled the first ball of dough flat with his palms and laid it in. The oil sizzled. The dough began to fry, golden, crispy at the edges. The aroma rose. Honey, cinnamon, fried dough, in a world where half the people ate plain porridge. That smell was like a physical blow. A girl of about 10 was the first to approach, barefoot, dirty, standing 3 steps away. Eyes enormous. 3 more appeared behind her. An old man, a woman holding a child, a young man in his 20s. Everyone watching the pan. Daniel flipped the hotdog, golden crust. He broke it open. Inside, the honey and cinnamon had melted into a hot sweet mass. Steam rose. He held out half to the girl for free. She grabbed it. She bit in, burned her tongue, jumped up and down. But she did not spit it out. She chewed with her mouth open, blowing on her tongue, and she smiled, wide and bright and unstoppable. Mitsu stepped forward without being asked. She took the board, stood in front of the stall, and began to sell. Calm, steady, no shouting. Here are the flatbreads, sweet and hot, to copper coins apiece. People came cautiously at first. One tried it, then another, then a third. An old man, about 60, few teeth, took a bite and froze. He chewed slowly. His eyes went wide. He looked at the hotdog. He looked at Daniel. He asked what it was. Daniel said, honey flatbread, an old family recipe. The old man nodded. He finished it. He bought a second one for his wife. By noon, there was a line of 20 people. Daniel fried without stopping. The pan never cooled. The oil sizzled. The flatbreads flew off one after another. Minsu counted the coins. By the end of the day, they had sold all 60. Daniel stood by the dying fire, his hands smelling of oil and honey, his back aching, his legs buzzing. Minsu poured the coins onto a board. She counted 120 copper coins. At this world's exchange rate, roughly 1/9 of silver, 1 out of 5 needed in a single day. She counted again, a third time. She looked at Daniel. Her eyes were different. Not piercing, not cautious, burning. She said, for days until the next market, if they made twice as many flatbreads. Daniel said twice as many meant 120. They would need more flour, more honey, more oil, and a second pan. Mitsu said the widow Yuna had an old pan, rusty, but intact, and Yuna needed money for taxes too. Daniel nodded. Simple as all good ideas. Bring Yuna in, give her a job, split the profits. The pans, the cellars, twice the flatbreads, twice the silver. On the walk home, they were silent for a long time. The baskets were empty. The small bag of coins hung from Mitsu's belt. She held it close with her hand, like something alive. Half an hour from the village, she said he was a different person. Daniel didn't answer. She said she couldn't explain it. Same voice, same face, but different. As if someone had let the old Jiho out and put someone new in. Daniel walked and said nothing. His heart was pounding. Mitsu said she didn't care who he was. Only one thing mattered. The children were fed. The roof didn't leak. The morning smelled of food. If this new Jiho could provide that, she would stand by his side. Not because she loved him. Because of the children. Daniel said he understood. That it was enough, for now, at least. They walked on side by side, not touching, but side by side. In the village, Hannah came running to meet them, serious face. She asked if Appa had brought anything. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the last hotdog. He had saved it for her. Hannah took it. She bit in. She chewed. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She delivered her verdict. Dad, you're a genius. Then she ran off to share it with her brother. Mitsu watched her daughter go. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. A ghost of a smile. But Daniel saw it, and that was enough for the rest of the evening, all through the night, and all of tomorrow. For days left until tax collection, 1/9 of silver under the floorboards, for still missing. Daniel didn't sleep. He counted 60 hotdog at 1/9. He needed 300 into market days. He went to Yuna before dawn. Her hut was worse than his own, crooked walls. Her deaf mother-in-law sorting pebbles in the yard. Yuna stepped out with red eyes. She hadn't slept. He explained quickly, market, flatbreads, second pan, split the profits. Yuna listened. First disbelief, then calculation, then the hunger of someone offered a job after a year of doing nothing. She asked how much he had earned. He said 1/9. She went still. 1/9 in a day. She earned 1/4 of a 9 a month washing clothes for wealthy households. She said she had a pan, rusty, but she would clean it up. She would be ready tomorrow. She called after him as he turned to leave. Her hands were clasped. She said if this was a joke, she didn't find it funny. Daniel looked her in the eyes. He said, tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock, his house. The dough will be ready. He left. The next 2 nights were a production line. Flour from the pantry in careful measured batches. He could feel the shelves getting lighter. The pantry replenished itself when he cooked for others. The balance was fragile. He had to keep giving to keep receiving. Mitsu shaped the dough balls. Her fingers had memorized the movements from the very first time. Quick, not a single wasted motion. Yuna arrived in the dark with a torch and a frying pan polished to a shine. Daniel showed her the method. Thin oil, medium heat, 2 minutes one side, 90 seconds the other. Golden, not dark, not pale, golden. She burned the first 3. The 4th wasn't done through. The 5th was perfect. She lifted it from the pan and looked at it. A perfect circle, the crust exactly right. The filling melted inside. She smiled. Wide, bright, the first real smile Daniel had ever seen on her face. By dawn they had 150 filled balls, Mitsu shaped. Yuna helped. Daniel ran quality control on the filling. Every ball identical, every portion measured. The foundation of the restaurant business in a medieval hut by torchlight. The second market was different. 3 of them working, Daniel frying, Yuna frying, Mitsu selling. Mitsu took charge before anyone said a word. She was walking through the crowd, approaching people, offering samples. Her voice soft, but carrying something new in it. Not desperation, not performance, confidence. She was standing behind the work of her own hands for the first time in 6 years. People could feel it. By noon they had sold 100. By sunset, 140. They kept 10 for dinner. 280 copper coins, almost 3/9, plus the one from the first market. 4 out of 5. One still missing. Yuna came forward quietly. She said she had half a nine saved from 6 months of laundry. She would give it to them. She was going to lose it to rent anyway. Daniel shook his head. Yuna raised an eyebrow and said he had 2 children. She had only her mother-in-law, who didn't understand what was happening. Mitsu stepped in. She said they would take it and pay it back from the next market's profits. Yuna nodded businesslike, calm, as if she had just closed a business deal rather than handed over her last savings. 4.5 nine, half still missing. And then Hannah solved it. She was sitting by the hut when they arrived home, waiting. She stood up and held out her hand, a single copper coin in her palm, old, tarnished, found under a rock by the stream. Daniel looked at it. He recognized it. Old minting, 50 years or more. Collectors at market paid above face value for these. A dealer in the county town bought old coins. One in good condition could fetch a quarter to half a nine. He crouched down in front of Hannah. He told her she was a good girl. She asked if it was enough. He said it might be. She nodded and went to report to her brother. Next morning, Daniel walked 3 hours to the county town. He found the dealer in a shop crammed with odds and ends. He showed the coin. The old man's eyes lit up. He offered a quarter nine. Daniel shook his head. The coin was in good condition. The mini was clear. The edges smooth. He said half a nine. The dealer haggled. Daniel stood silent. He had learned this in Seattle, at the wholesale markets, at Pike Place. If you show weakness, they eat you alive. Silence is the weapon. Whoever speaks first loses. The dealer spoke first. He offered 3/8. Daniel stayed silent. The dealer sighed. Half a nine. Done. A silver coin landed in his palm, heavy, cool, and exactly what was needed. Tax day was cold. Morning fog lined over the valley like a wet blanket. Manager chose collector arrive on horseback with 3 servants in dark robes. They went door to door, knock, pay, or face consequences. Crying from the neighboring huts. A woman begging for another week. A man with nothing left to give. Children sobbing. The collector reached Daniel's door. He knocked. Daniel opened it. The collector named him Sojiho and said, 5-9. Daniel took out the pouch. He poured 5 coins into the collector's palm. The collector counted, recounted. He looked at Daniel. On his face, the face of a man who saw numbers all day, nothing else. Something appeared. Surprise, Sojiho, drunk, deadbeat, never paid on time in 6 years. Standing here sober, paying the full amount. The collector made his note, turned away, walked to the next yard. Not a single word. But Daniel saw him glance back once, a quick look over his shoulder. At the hut with the new roof, the door that closed smoothly, the smoke from the chimney smelling of baked dough. The collector had taken note, and that was dangerous. That evening the village was quiet with the silence that follows disaster. Fewer than half the 120 households had paid. The rest lost something. Someone gave their last grain. Someone promised seasons of labor on Cho's land. 3 families gave their children. 3 children taken away on carts. Daniel stood at the door and looked out at the village. Mitsu came and stood beside him. She said the Kim family had given their eldest daughter, 13 years old. Her mother ran after the cart until she collapsed. His nails dug into his palms. He had paid his tax. He had saved his family. But he could have made more flatbreads, could have earned more, could have helped more. Mitsu seemed to read his thoughts. She said he couldn't save everyone at once. He had saved his family. That was enough. Daniel shook his head. He said it wasn't enough. Mitsu looked at him for a long time. She said he was crazy. She went inside. But there was no anger in her voice. There was something else. The confusion of a person who has discovered she is living next to someone she doesn't know at all. That night Daniel lay staring at the dark ceiling. He remembered that he had a pantry and a debt. The sign had said, "You owe, feed." He understood now that the debt wasn't only to his family. It was to the 3 children on the carts, to the woman who collapsed on the road, to all of them. The pantry had fed on his cooking for others. The more he gave, the more returned. He had used it carefully, strategically, for his own survival. He needed to think bigger. He didn't fall asleep until dawn. When he did, he dreamed of a door standing open in the dark. The second month began with potatoes. Daniel had been thinking about this since day one. Potatoes were the key to everything. In a world where rice yielded 1 harvest a year, and that harvest had failed 3 seasons running, you needed something different. Potatoes grow in 3 months. From 1 tuber, you get 10. From 10, 100. From 100, 1,000. The math was simple, the implications were revolutionary, and the danger was real. He took 5 small tubers from the pantry, ones with sprouting eyes, and went to work on a plot behind the hut. A slope, well-drained, sun for half the day. He broke the soil, removed stones, dug furrows a palm's depth. He cut the tubers into pieces, 2 or 3 eyes on each, let them dry a day, planted them, covered, watered, waited. Minsu asked what he had planted. He said mountain root, grows underground, yields a lot. She asked where the seeds came from. He said Uncle Mambuk again, the same legend, more frayed. Her gaze was heavy. She was saving up questions. The cup would overflow eventually. He knew that. He feared it. A week later, green shoots pushed through the soil, strong, hungry for light. Daniel fed them ash from the hearth, watered them at dawn. Minsu helped silently. She didn't believe in the mountain root. She believed in work. When everything else deceives you, work is the only thing left to trust. Alongside the potato plot, the front of the hut became a small eatery, a bench along the wall, a wider hearth. Yuna's second pan on the wall. The idea was barter, feed people in exchange for whatever they had. Vegetables, firewood, labor. Not money. Old Grandma Bai was the first to arrive. 80 years old, hunchbacked, a cane. A bunch of green onions in her hand. Daniel sat her at the table and made rice porridge with egg, and onion sautéed in a drop of sesame oil. She ate spoonful by spoonful, and when she lifted her head, her eyes were wet. She said that was how her mother-in-law used to cook 50 years ago, when the land still yielded, when rice was rice and not just chaff. She bowed and left. The next day she came with a friend. The friend brought a turnip. A week later, 3 or 4 people sat at the table every day. The small economy of the So hearth had begun. Someone brought fish from the stream, small, bony, but fish. Daniel fried it whole in a pan with garlic and salt. Crispy outside, tender inside. The man who brought it sat down, ate his own fish, and didn't recognize it. He asked what kind of fish it was. Daniel said it was the very one he had brought. The man didn't believe him. He tried another piece. He shook his head. He said, "It couldn't be. This one is delicious." He came back the next day with 5 fish, bigger, fresher, and he came back every day after that. Kim Tong, a fisherman from the stream, quiet, scarred hands, a man of few words, the first regular supplier. Yuna started working in the eatery on the 3rd day, not cooking, managing the room. She cleared tables. She served bowls. She chatted with the guests, and she was brilliant at it. She remembered every name, every preference, every detail. Old Bai likes her porridge thin. Blacksmith Park likes it saltier. The fisherman's wife wants rice separate from the fish. Yuna held it all in her head and never made a mistake. Daniel watched her work and saw a floor manager, a hostess, the kind of person who makes a restaurant not just a place to eat, but a place people return to. One evening, Yuna was washing bowls by the well. Daniel came out to help. She was silent for a while. Then she said tomorrow was the anniversary, 1 year since her husband had died. She kept washing. Her hands moved mechanically. She said the last thing she remembered about him was his face at dinner. He had been angry. The soup wasn't cooked long enough. She had been in a hurry. Not enough firewood. The soup was undercooked. He looked at her and didn't say anything. He just looked and left. And the next day he went off to war and didn't come back. For a year she had fallen asleep with that look before her eyes, with that undercooked soup. Daniel listened. When she stopped, he asked what kind of soup it had been. Yuna said, doenjang jjigae, soybean paste, tofu, zucchini, green onions, an ordinary dinner, an ordinary last supper. Daniel nodded. He said nothing else. Before dawn the next morning, the anniversary, he opened the pantry and took out miso paste, tofu, zucchini, green onions, dried anchovies. He made the broth first, clear, rich, simmered slow, then stirred in the paste. Tofu in cubes, zucchini in thin half-moons, green onion finely chopped. The soup simmered on low heat, thick and fragrant and warm. When Yuna arrived, Daniel placed a single bowl in front of her, nothing else on the table, just the soup. Yuna leaned in. She sniffed. She froze. Her face changed, as if someone had removed the mask she had worn for a full year. Beneath it was the face of a 26-year-old woman who had lost her husband and hadn't had time to feed him properly. She picked up the spoon. She tasted it. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the spoon was trembling. She ate quietly, tears running down her cheeks, not sobbing, just crying steadily, like rain against a window. When the bowl was empty, she sat still for a long time. Then she raised her head. She said the soup was just right, just the way she had wanted to make it that evening, just the way it was supposed to be. Daniel nodded. Yuna stood, wiped her face with her sleeve, and said she would work for him every day. Daniel said he was glad. Yuna nodded and smiled, wide, uneven, through the tears, the smile of someone who had remembered how to do it. Minsu had seen most of it from around the corner. That night she turned toward him for the second time, not toward the wall. She said Yuna had been unwell all year. She had tried to help but didn't know how. She paused. Then she said the soup was a good idea. She said normal men don't think about what kind of soup a stranger's widow needs. Daniel said he thinks about what kind of food every person needs, that it is all he knows how to do. Minsu was silent. Then she said she didn't understand him, but she wanted to. The half-meter of earth between their sleeping mats had grown shorter, by a single millimeter. The third month brought Sora. Daniel found her in a forest clearing while gathering firewood, a young woman of about 24, crouching before a bush with a small knife, 12 pouches on her belt, each tied with a different color of string. She heard him before she saw him. She sprang up with the knife forward, eyes wary, almost feral. Daniel stopped and raised both hands. He recognized the bush, wild herbs. He asked about them. She corrected him. It was not mint. It was sukat, mountain wormwood. He knew sukat. His grandmother had sent dried bundles from Korea. He used it in rice cake dough for chuseok. He said sukat was good in dough. She lowered the knife and looked at him with something new in her eyes. Not fear, surprise. She told him no one in the village knew sukat was edible. Everyone called it a witch's herb. Daniel sat on a fallen tree and said that many useful things are called weeds until someone proves otherwise. She stood there. Then she sat, far away, but she sat. Her name was Sora. So Jiho's memory knew her, a half-blood, mother from the steppe, father a local hunter, both dead. She lived alone on the edge of the forest. The villagers called her a witch or a half-breed, sometimes both. They didn't speak to her, didn't let her near the well. 24 years of solitude in the body of a young woman who knew every plant in these mountains and had not a single friend. Daniel asked what other herbs she gathered. She answered cautiously at first, then faster. The 12 pouches began to make sense. Wild garlic, mountain sorrel, bracken fern, wild sesame, angelica, mountain ginseng shoots, pilla seeds. He listened and saw not a herbalist. He saw a forager. The same role Marcus had played in Seattle, the man who turned the forest into a pantry. Daniel offered a partnership. She brings herbs. He cooks dishes using them. They split what comes of it. Sora looked at him for a long time. She asked why he needed them. He said he had a small eatery that was growing. She asked what he knew how to do with herbs. He smiled and said he knew what to do with them once they were in his kitchen. She didn't smile back, but she nodded. She said she would come tomorrow to take a look. The next morning, a bundle of herbs lay on the threshold. Wild garlic, young fern shoots, sukat, tied with rough rope, and on top of it, a flat stone with a single word scratched into it in charcoal. Show me. He rinsed the herbs, laid them out on a board, sniffed each one. He closed his eyes. He leafed through the archive. Sukat in the dough and tea. Wild garlic deeper than the regular kind. Fern stir-fried with sesame and soy sauce, gosari namel. A dish that has existed in Korean kitchens for centuries. He cooked. The fern glistened with sesame oil. The dough turned green and herbal and alive. Green flatbreads with a slightly bitter, grassy aftertaste, unusual, interesting, delicious. When Sora arrived, he placed 3 bowls in front of her, gosari namel, green sukat flatbreads, plain rice. She looked at the bowls. She picked up chopsticks. She tasted the fern. Her eyes widened slightly. She tasted the flatbread. She turned it over in her hands. She took a bite. She put the chopsticks down. She said, "These are my herbs." Daniel nodded. He said exactly, her herbs, her taste. It wouldn't have worked without her. Sora sat quietly. Then she said no one had ever. She stopped, started again. She said no one in her entire life had ever treated her knowledge as something valuable. A rag, a witch, a half-breed. That was all she had ever heard. And here was a man taking her herbs and turning them into food that made you want to close your eyes. Daniel waited. Sora stood up. She said she would come back tomorrow with mushrooms. As she left without looking back. But her back was different. A little straighter, a little more certain of where it was going. She came every day after that. At first she left the herbs at the door. Then she started coming inside. Then she started offering advice. This root needs soaking for 2 days, or it will be bitter. These mushrooms should dry in the sun, not shade. Pick this herb only before the morning dew has dried. Daniel listened. He memorized everything. Every piece of advice became a new entry, local knowledge found in no cookbook on earth. 2 weeks later, Sora was sitting at the communal table next to Yuna, next to Minsu, eating from the same bowl. Yuna chatted with her like an old friend. Minsu poured her tea. Hannah showed her mud pies. Sora watched all of it and didn't understand how she had gotten here. Daniel watched her shoulders slowly drop. Her fingers stopped gripping the chopstick so hard. Her breathing evened out. This is what a person looks like when they are let inside after 24 years in the cold. One morning he found not just herbs at the door. A whole basket, 20 varieties, each wrapped separately. Each one labeled in charcoal on a small paper square. Crooked letters, a label, name, harvest time, properties. A forager's guide compiled at night by torchlight. For him, because she wanted him to know. Daniel held the basket and looked at the crooked letters. Something deep inside him shifted. The pantry door gave a quiet shudder, as if someone behind it had grunted with approval. The 4th month, the eatery had grown to tables for 8, a canopy over the yard. People from neighboring villages made the walk. A farmer from Surrey walked to ours because his godfather had told him about the honey flatbreads. A salt merchant turned off the road because he caught the smell of fried fish from 50 paces. 3 women from Cheech came together and said they wanted to try the soup everyone in the county was talking about. Daniel fed them all. The barter system expanded. Fabric, clay pots, 2 days of work on the plot. Whatever people had. Minsu managed everything. It happened without ceremony. She simply began to decide, and no one questioned it. Who owed what? How much the cloth was worth? How many sacks of flour were left? She calculated in her head faster than Daniel could write. In another world she would have run a corporation, or an army, or both. Yuna ran the dining room like a conductor. She knew every guest, remembered every name, and when she laughed, people came partly just to hear it. In a village where everyone walked around looking older than their years, a young widow who could laugh out loud was a miracle. Sora brought herbs every morning. Daniel named every dish that used them. He said it aloud to the guests. This is Sora's recipe. She found these mushrooms. Sora sat in the corner and went red, but every day her back was a little straighter. The potatoes grew knee-high, dense and dark-leaved, not a yellow spot among them. Villagers walked past and shook their heads at the strange bushes with no ears of grain. Minsu shook her head along with them, but she kept helping. Daniel had not let her down once and for months. Not once. Hannah decided the potato plants were her personal charges. Every morning she walked the rows, counted each plant, checked each leaf. She picked off beetles with her fingers and carried them far away. A 5-year-old agronomist in a dirty dress. Young-Ho's change was slower. He still didn't speak to Daniel, still didn't sit next to him. But he had stopped hiding food, stopped turning away at the table. Small shifts, tectonic in scale. One evening Daniel was kneading dough for the morning flatbreads, hands deep in flour. Young-Ho sat against the wall as usual, watching. Then he stood up. He walked, not to Daniel, to the table. He reached out and touched the dough. His fingers sank into the soft mass. He froze and looked at them. Daniel kept kneading without pausing. He said, in his usual voice, that if the boy wanted to try, he could. He showed the motion, pressed down with the heel of the palm, fold, press again. Young-Ho placed both hands on the dough and began. Too hard at first, the dough spreading out. Daniel corrected him gently. Don't press down. Feel it. The dough is alive. It will tell you when it's enough. Young-Ho tried again. Better. Again. Better still. For 5 minutes, they kneaded side by side in silence. For hands in the flour, big and small. When the dough was ready, Young-Ho stepped back, wiped his hands on his pants, looked at Daniel once, and went to his mat. Minsu had been watching from behind the wall. Daniel had heard her hold her breath when the boy touched the dough. He heard her exhale when he started kneading. That night she lay facing him for the second time. The 5th month, potato harvest. The tops had yellowed. Daniel chose a morning after rain when the soil was soft. He pulled on the first bush. Tubers came up from the ground, pale, round, the size of his fist. 5 from the first bush. He dug with his hands. 3 more. 8 potatoes from one planted clump. From 5 bushes, 37 tubers, heavy, solid, smelling of earth and possibility. Hannah crouched down and touched one. She said it felt like a rock. He said inside it wasn't a rock at all. He peeled 5, sliced them thin, put them in the pan with oil and finely chopped garlic and a pinch of salt. The slices sizzled. The edges went golden and crisp. The center stayed soft. A new smell rose. Nothing like this had ever existed in this village. Fried potatoes with garlic, the simplest thing you can do with them, and the most compelling. Hannah tasted first as always. She blew on a slice, bit in, chewed. Her face changed slowly. She chewed. She swallowed. She looked at the slice in her hand. She looked at Daniel. She said, "It wasn't a rock." He said, "No, not a rock." She said it tasted better than hadiak. Yuna choked. Minsu raised an eyebrow. Hadiak was their pride, their livelihood, their first victory. And then Daniel laughed, real laughter, from the gut, for the first time in this life. Minsu looked at him. Something on her face moved, not a smile, but something that was alive. The 6th month, manager chose Collector Kwon came to inspect and found a wooden gate, a canopy over tables, guests eating mushroom soup. He told Daniel the eatery had to register as a trading operation. Sales tax, 1/10 of income every month. Daniel stood with a spatula in his hand and said calmly, "This was not trade. This was barter. No money changed hands. No income, no tax." Kwon's thin smile said he had heard the argument before. He named the monthly sum, denying of silver, or consequences. He gave a week and left on horseback. Minsu stood white-faced. Yuna froze with bowls in her hands. Sora watched from the doorway. That evening the 4 of them sat at the First World Council, Daniel, Minsu, Yuna, Sora. Minsu ran the numbers. Denying was impossible. Yuna said they could earn more. Sora said if they didn't pay, Joe would come and take everything, the house, the land, the children. Daniel stared at the fire. He thought Kwon was a pawn. Behind him stood Chodwan. If Daniel paid, Joe would raise the amount. Every month, a little more, until nothing was left. A third way was needed. Not pay, not rebel. Become so useful that breaking him would cost more than keeping him. He raised his head and said he would pay, but not denying, and not with silver, with food. He explained. Chodwan was a rich man. Rich men have silver. What they don't have is food worth remembering. In a world where even nobles ate bland porridge with dried gray meat, real flavor was worth more than coin. He would supply Cho's table once a week, the best food in the district, for the master, his wives, his guests. Not money, a favor, make Cho dependent on the one thing he couldn't get anywhere else. Minsu listened. Her expression didn't change. Then she said it was either genius or suicidal. Yuna said more likely the latter. Daniel said he would go to the Cho estate the next morning. Minsu said, not alone. Someone had to keep track. Someone had to stop him from saying something he shouldn't. Their first joint operation. Before dawn they set out together, 2 hours on foot, to the stone-walled estate with the tiled roof and the garden pond. Kwon received them in the inner courtyard. Watery tea on a low table. The collector's face, cold and cold. Daniel unwrapped the bundle he had brought. 3 hadiak, the best he had ever made. Not market style. Home. Extra honey, extra cinnamon, crushed sesame in the filling. A taste built to be remembered. Kwon took one, bit in, chewed, and on a face Daniel had only ever seen in the States. Cold and colder, a third appeared. Confusion. He finished the first. He took the second. He ate it. He picked up the third and put it down, as if he forced himself. He said it was not worth denying of silver. Daniel agreed. He said it was worth more. He laid out the offer. Food for Chodwan's table. Once a week, a new dish every week, the best in 3 counties. When officials from the capital visit and taste that food, they don't remember the landlord. They remember the table. Food is a power everyone underestimates, he said. Kwon's face went cold again. but his eyes were thinking. He said he would pass it to the master. He asked to keep the third hadiak for Cho personally. Daniel left it. They walked out. On the road home, Mintsu said the third hadiak was a trap. Daniel said of course it was. He had planned it that way. A little more honey, a little more cinnamon, a little more sesame, a taste you want to repeat, after which ordinary food tastes like cardboard. The first dose free, the way a new cafe hands out espresso samples at the door. Try it, get hooked. Come back. Mintsu shook her head. She said he was a dangerous man. She wasn't smiling, but the corners of her lips were soft. Not tight, soft. 3 days later a letter arrived. Not from Kwon, from Cho-won himself, on fine paper with beautiful brushwork. Mr. Cho accepted the offer, food for his table once a week. In return, the So family exempt from all taxes for 1 year, with possibility of renewal. Mintsu read it for times. She put it down. She looked at Daniel. Her eyes were shining. She said he had one. Daniel shook his head. He said he had bought time. Cho would want more. And a dependent person doesn't break what feeds them. Mintsu nodded. Then she reached out and placed her palm on his hand. 1 second, firm, like someone gripping the edge of a boat in a storm, and pulled away. She stood up and went to the children, but his hand went on burning long after. 1 second. 1 touch, the first she had made of her own free will, and for months, the 7th month, winter coming down the mountain like a thief, morning frost, cold northern wind, the first powder snow. Daniel had been preparing for weeks. The second potato harvest. Over 100 tubers in the cellar, walls of stone, wooden lid, straw rows, cold and dry. Beside them, sacks of rice, sorted grain by grain, turnips, radishes, beans, dried mushrooms on strings from the ceiling, and kimchi, 3 pots, fermenting. No chili pepper in this world, but mustard, ginger, garlic, fish sauce, real kimchi. Mintsu helped knead the cabbage, pressing salt and spices into every leaf, her back straight. Not a word of complaint. The eatery had become a mill, a bakery, a small school under the awning where Mintsu taught 12 children to read every morning. Bread for free each dawn, 1 piece per child, on the condition they sat at the table and listened to a lesson. Hannah sat among them, top student, writing her letters slowly and correctly. Young-ho helped the younger ones hold their sticks, 9 years old, already an assistant. Eri arrived in the 7th month, out of the snow, literally. Mintsu found her collapsed on the threshold, 17 years old, blue-lipped, eyes closed. They dragged her inside, wrapped her in blankets, gave her hot broth, beef and ginger, which she drank with both hands without stopping. When she woke, she said her village had burned. Bandits from the northern border. She was the only one left. 3 days walking without food or warm clothes. Mintsu looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Mintsu, a wordless conversation lasting 1 second. Mintsu nodded. Daniel told Eri she could stay as long as needed. There was one price. Once she was back on her feet, she would help in the kitchen. She agreed to fast, the way someone agrees when they know kindness always has a catch. For days later she was standing at the cutting board. Daniel showed her the motion, knife in right hand, left hand curled, tip of the blade never leaving the board. By the 50th stroke she was cutting smooth. By the end of the week she was faster than Daniel. He wasn't exaggerating. Under her knife, carrots became thin uniform slices, as if pressed from a mold. Radishes into perfect cubes, onion into translucent half rings. He saw his first real student, the one he had been waiting to find without knowing it. Supplies for Cho went out every week. Each time, Daniel cooked as if the dish were being judged by someone who had never tasted anything. Good before, roast duck with mountain herbs, rice dumplings with sweet potato baked in clay, 5 mushroom soup simmered 6 hours until the broth ran golden clear. Around the 6th delivery, Kwon said thank you, almost inaudibly, as if the word were physically difficult to produce. One day Kwon lingered after dropping off the basket. He said his wife had been sick 3 days. She couldn't keep anything down. Daniel went to the kitchen. An hour later he returned with a small pot, rice porridge and bone broth, cooked to a cream, with ginger, honey, and a drop of sesame, food for the sick. Simple and warm and easy on the body. Kwon took the pot. Something flashed across his face, fast, like a fish underwater, and was gone. He nodded and left. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Cho-won himself. Not a demand, an invitation to dinner at the estate. Mintsu said it was a trap or a test or both. Daniel said it was an opportunity. Minsu said those often looked the same. She said she would wait outside the gates all night if necessary. Her voice left no room for discussion. The estate was different by evening. Lanterns along the path, warm light from windows. A garden sinking into shadow. Daniel had expected stone. Jodwan was small and thin, with slender fingers and intelligent eyes and a face that was 60 years old at 45. The face of a man who carries a burden and does not show it. Cho looked at him for a long time. Then he said he wanted to meet the man whose cooking had made Kwan say thank you. For the first time in 20 years. Daniel said food is an honest language. It doesn't know how to lie. If it is delicious, it was made with soul. If it is soulless, no spice will save it. Cho smiled, the first sign of life on that stony face. Between courses, he asked questions. Where did Daniel learn to cook? Where did the strange vegetables come from? Daniel answered with half-truths wrapped in legends. Cho didn't believe any of it. Those intelligent eyes sifted through every phrase like a merchant, checking for counterfeits. Then Cho set down his chopsticks. He looked away. He said he missed his wet nurse's rice cakes. Small, round, thin dough, sweet red bean filling. He ate them every day after school. Sitting on the porch, the world was simple then. Then she died. The cakes ran out. The world stopped being simple. He spoke without emotion, as if reading a list, but his fingers on the table trembled slightly. Daniel listened. He memorized every word. Small, round, thin dough, sweet filling. After school on the porch, he went home. He found red beans at the market, soaked them overnight, simmered them for hours until they became a dark sweet paste. Rice flour from the pantry, kneaded with hot water into elastic warm dough. Small circles, almost transparent. A spoonful of filling, edges pinched closed. 20 dumplings, steamed, not fried, not boiled, steamed, bamboo steamer over boiling water. 15 minutes, white, soft, filling just visible through the skin. He carried the basket to the estate himself. Chodwan was in his office, buried in papers. He looked up and saw the basket. He reached out, picked up one dumpling, brought it to his face, sniffed it. His hand trembled. He took a bite, chewed slowly, eyes closed. He swallowed. He opened his eyes. They were wet. Chodwan, lord of 3 counties, a man who could sell an entire village with a single word, sat at his desk with tears on his face, eating rice cakes one after another in silence. He stopped at the 4th. He put it on the table and asked how Daniel had known the taste. Not similar to the wet nurse's cakes, the same taste. Exactly. Daniel said he had listened. That 20 years in a kitchen teach you to hear not the words, but the flavor behind the words. Small means 1 bite. Round means shaped by palm. Thin dough means rice flour with hot water. Cho ordered the rest taken to his wives. Then he turned back and made his offer, a banquet for the capital inspector arriving in 1 month. 20 dishes, Daniel's best. In return, not patronage, not tax exemption. A full commercial partnership, a mill, a bakery, a proper kitchen, profits split equally. Everything Daniel had been planning for the year ahead, offered in exchange for 1 evening. He said yes. Cho held out his hand. Daniel shook it. On the way home, Minsu listened to everything. Then she said 20 dishes in 1 evening was madness. Daniel said in Seattle he used to cook 120 per shift. Then he stopped. Seattle, a word that didn't belong here. Minsu asked what Seattle was. He said it was the name of the place where his grandmother ran a kitchen. Far from here, very far. She looked at him for a long time. She said someday he would tell her the truth. Not today. Someday, he said he would. She nodded. They walked home shoulder to shoulder, and their hands brushed as they walked. Neither of them pulled away. The banquet day came with snow. The inspector was a woman, young Heejin, 31, in men's robes, a porcelain mask face, precise and cold. The team worked 6 hours in the estate's kitchen, Daniel at the main station, Eri cutting and supplying, Sora on broths, Yuna on plating, Minsu commanding. 20 dishes went out in waves, rice chips with soybean honey sauce, clear golden mushroom soup with mountain mint, 3 kinds of kimchi, steamed fish on a bed of forest herbs, potato chips from the new mountain root. The clay pot pork came out last before the desserts. Daniel carried it himself, lifted the lid at the table, and watched the steam fill the room. He saw Heejin's mask crack for 1 second. Her jaw froze, her eyes widened, the throat moved. Then the mask returned. 1 second of truth on the face of a woman who had spent her life hiding. He saw it. The rice cakes with red beans were served last. Heejin broke one open, looked at the filling, took a bite, and went completely still. Her whole body, as if someone had pressed pause. She set the dumpling on the table, stared into the air, and quietly asked who had cooked. Cho said, "Master So, the local chef." Heejin nodded once. She said nothing more. She finished the dumpling. She did not take a second one. But the next morning she sent a message requesting a private meeting. She came to him, without the mask and without ceremony, and told him the truth. The rice cake tasted like her mother's, the mother executed 24 years ago. She had not tasted anything like it since, and she wanted to know how. She left him with a warning and a mission. War was coming in 6 months. Armies march on full stomachs, and the cook who works miracles out of nothing would be needed. He had fed a family, a village, and a valley, and now the world itself was hungry, and so Jiho, Daniel So, was the only man alive who knew how to answer.